There's a version of America that travels well. It glows in neon, argues on television, sells sneakers to the world, and somehow always seems to take place in New York, Los Angeles, Washington, or on a desert road with a pickup truck in the distance. And then, there's the America people actually arrive in. Not the one exported through headlines and movies. The one behind the airport rental car desk. The one where dinner is at 5:30. The supermarket aisle is the length of a runway. The high school stadium is full on a Thursday night. And the woman at the pharmacy asks how your day's going like she might genuinely want an answer. That's the America a lot of Europeans are never told about. Because the first surprise is not that America is louder than expected. It's that so much of it is quieter, more ordinary, more local, less cinematic. The deeper question isn't why Europe misunderstands America. It's why a country that has been watched so obsessively can still remain so unseen. Official U.S. tourism data even organizes overseas travel around the country's most visited states and cities, which hints at something important. Many foreign visitors encounter America through a relatively narrow set of gateway places. That's real America too, of course. But it is not most of America. Most Americans do not live in the dense urban cores that dominate the global imagination. Pew found that 55% of Americans live in suburban counties and smaller metropolitan areas. In other words, the American experience is much more likely to happen in a ring road, a school district, a warehouse store, a backyard, a church hall, or a commuter corridor than under a famous skyline. And that changes everything. Because if you arrive expecting America, singular, what you actually discover is an endless chain of small Americas. Korean-American suburbs outside Washington, Mexican-American neighborhoods in Texas, Somali communities in Minnesota, retiree Florida, college town Wisconsin, Mormon Utah, Appalachian towns, New England villages, black suburbs outside Atlanta, Arab-American Dearborn, military towns, farm towns, Sunbelt master plan developments, reservation land, Rust Belt main streets. The shock is not uniformity, it's fragmentation. And even the suburban America that Europeans often imagine as culturally blank has changed dramatically. Brookings, using 2020 census data, found that in major metro suburbs, the share of residents who are people of color rose from roughly 20% in 1990 to 45% in 2020. In many of those suburbs, white youth are already in the minority. The old image of the suburb as a culturally uniform white belt around the city is no longer enough to explain what American daily life looks like. That's one of the first things foreigners often miss. America can feel aggressively standardized from above the same brands, the same roads, the same chain stores, while being intensely specific from below. The buildings repeat, the people don't. And that may be why the country feels so strange on a first real visit. Europe is used to reading identity from architecture. A city center, a church square, a train station, a medieval street history announces itself. In much of the United States, history hides in demographics, migration patterns, church calendars, school rivalries, and who brought what dish to the neighborhood potluck. Which brings us to the second surprise. For a continent that often reads America as hyper-individualistic, a lot of everyday American life is still organized around voluntary belonging. Not belonging in the grand ideological sense, belonging in the practical sense. The committee, the booster club, the parent group, the church team, the alumni network, the veterans hall, the food drive, the local fundraiser for someone's medical bills, the neighbor who has your spare key. Almost 2 centuries ago, Alexis de Tocqueville noticed this. Visiting the United States in the 1830s, he was struck by how often Americans organized themselves into associations. The Library of Congress summarizes his insight this way. In a democracy, citizens use associations to connect with neighbors and amplify their voice. He called association making a kind of mother science of democratic life. That doesn't mean he solved America, but he saw something durable, and the pattern never fully disappeared. AmeriCorps and the U.S. Census Bureau found that an estimated 23.2% of Americans formally volunteered through organizations in the latest Volunteering and Civic Life in America summary, while nearly 51% informally helped others by exchanging favors with neighbors. That is not the picture of a country made only of isolated individuals. It is a picture of a country where formal institutions may feel distant, but local problem-solving is still often social. Pew's 2025 survey adds a more intimate version of the same story. Only about a quarter of Americans say they know all or most of their neighbors. So this is not some nostalgic fantasy of universal front porch closeness, but 44% say they trust all or most of the people in their neighborhood. 59% say they have a neighbor they'd feel comfortable asking to keep a set of keys for emergencies. And large majorities say they would bring in mail, water plants, or bring food to someone who is sick. America may be less socially trusting than it used to be, but it is not socially empty. That matters because Europeans often arrive prepared to decode America through ideology when a lot of daily American life is actually organized through logistics. Who is taking the kids to practice? Who knows the pastor? Who can lend a truck? Which diner everybody goes to after the game? Which aunt moved back from Arizona? Who can recommend a dentist? In much of America, social life is less elegantly public than in Europe. It doesn't always happen in a square. It happens in parking lots. And then there is religion. Not necessarily theology, not always doctrine, sometimes just atmosphere. For many Europeans, one of the most quietly disorienting things about the United States is that religion is not fully private. It can still shape the rhythm of a town, the language of everyday life, the expectations around family, charity, and even optimism. Pew found that U.S. adults are markedly more religious than Western Europeans by multiple measures. About 68% of American Christians in the survey prayed daily, compared with a median of 18% among Christians across the surveyed Western European countries. Even religiously unaffiliated Americans often reported levels of belief or practice that would look unusually strong in much of Western Europe. That doesn't mean America is one giant sermon. It means the country still carries layers of moral language and community organization that many Europeans no longer expect to see in modern rich societies. A church may function as a spiritual home, a childcare network, a food pantry, an emotional support system, a job referral board, and the place where half the town knows your grandmother. To someone raised in a more secular environment, that can feel either comforting or unsettling, sometimes both at once. And that combination, private freedom, public ritual, local volunteerism, is the part of America that often gets lost between two louder stories. One story says America is a machine, capitalism, ambition, speed, brands, spectacle. The other says America is a crisis, polarization, inequality, violence, distrust, fragmentation. Both stories are true in part. Neither explains what it actually feels like to spend a week in a town where the pharmacist knows your last name. The school musical matters, and half the people at the fundraiser disagree about everything except the fact that the roof has to be fixed by Monday. Of course, this is where the romantic version becomes dangerous, because the America nobody told Europeans about is not automatically a nicer America. It can also be a harder one. The same localism that creates warmth can create exclusion. The same suburban comfort can produce car dependence, loneliness, and invisible segregation. The same volunteer culture that looks generous can exist alongside a weaker safety net, forcing private kindness to patch holes that public systems never closed. And not every visitor finds friendliness reassuring. To some Europeans, it can feel performative, overwhelming, or exhausting. Even trust requires nuance. Pew's broader 2025 report shows that only around a third of Americans say most people can be trusted, and trust has declined over the last decade. But the same report also notes that America is not uniquely distrustful among high-income countries. In one international comparison, it sat around the middle, above some European countries and below others. Our World in Data makes the same larger point from another angle. Trust varies enormously inside Europe itself, with Nordic countries far above many Southern and Eastern societies. So Europe trusts more is too simple, and America trusts nobody is too simple too. That may be the most important correction of all. Europeans are often taught to compare Europe to America as if both were single personalities. But the real comparison is messier. Denmark is not Sicily. Texas is not Vermont. Rural Ohio is not Brooklyn. Southern California is not Mississippi. The Atlantic Divide is real, but so are the smaller divides nested inside it, which means the America nobody told them about is not some hidden pure essence waiting behind the postcard. It is simply the America that doesn't export itself as efficiently. It doesn't become a global symbol. It becomes a place. There's a revealing line in one famous interpretation of American history. Encyclopaedia Britannica's summary of Frederick Jackson Turner notes that his frontier thesis linked American identity to mobility, self-reliance, inventiveness, optimism, and the habit of reinvention, a theory modern historians no longer accept as a complete explanation, but one that still helps explain part of how Americans imagine themselves. Not as people who inherited a settled world, but as people forever moving through one. And maybe that's why the country can be so hard to see from Europe. Europe is full of places where the past sits visibly on the surface. America often hides its history inside motion. Inside who arrived last decade. Inside who left. Inside who built a new life 2 exits down the freeway. Inside who still talks like they might move again. So when Europeans come looking for the America they were promised, they often find something less coherent, less glamorous, and much more revealing. A country that is noisy from far away, but strangely intimate up close. A country that markets individualism, but still runs on favors. A country that looks standardized, but feels hyper-local. A country that seems young, yet carries rituals older than many visitors expect. And maybe that is the real discovery. Not that America was better than they thought. Not that it was worse. Just that it was more human. Less a theory, less a warning, less a movie, more a patchwork of neighborhoods, habits, loyalties, improvisations, and contradictions held together across impossible distances. The America nobody told them about is the one that doesn't ask to be admired, only understood, and maybe that is why it stays with people longer than the skyline does. If you've experienced an America that contradicted what you expected, whether you're European, American, or somewhere in between, share the moment that changed your picture of the country.